My name is Andrea and I am 26. If you met me today, you'd probably see a woman who walks with quiet confidence, someone who seems to have her life in order, or at least heading somewhere steady. But a few years ago, I was anything but that. I was a girl trying to build something out of nothing, holding on to a small dream like it was a fragile piece of glass that could shatter if anyone breathed too harshly around it. And, unfortunately, the people who breathed the harshest were the ones who should have supported me the most, my own family. I grew up in a home where success was measured by how normal your job looked to other people. If you had a degree in something predictable, like finance or engineering, you were praised. If you had a 9-to-5 job with a desk and a boss who wore a tie, you were taken seriously. My brother, Ethan, fit perfectly into that mold. He was 3 years older than me, always the golden boy, the one everyone bragged about at family gatherings. He had a stable job at a tech firm, an expensive car he loved to show off, and a group of friends who thought exactly like him. I, on the other hand, was the odd one out. While many people my age were applying for corporate jobs, I was spending my nights in a tiny rented garage space, building handmade furniture and home decor. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't predictable, and to everyone, especially Ethan, it wasn't real. But to me, it was everything. It was the first time in my life I felt like I was creating something that had a piece of my soul in it. Every table, every wooden frame, every drawer I carved felt like a quiet conversation between me and the world, saying, "Here, this is what I can do." Of course, most people didn't understand that, and I slowly learned to stop expecting them to. Still, nothing prepared me for the night everything changed, the night that set the entire revenge in motion. Ethan had invited me to a luxury dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. At first, I thought it was his attempt to bond with me, maybe even show a bit of support. I had recently posted a few photos of my work online, and they had gotten more attention than I expected. A small interior design page had even reshared my pieces. I was excited not because it made me rich or famous, but because for the first time, strangers believed in something I made. And sometimes, belief from strangers feels stronger than disbelief from your own blood. When Ethan called and said, "Hey, come have dinner with us," I felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe he was finally seeing me as something more than the family's confused little artist. I arrived at the restaurant a bit early. The place smelled like butter, garlic, and money, like a room where people pretended their lives were perfect. The lights were warm and dim, reflecting softly off the marble floors. I stood there waiting for Ethan and his group of friends, trying not to look too out of place in my simple black dress. I remember staring at my shoes, taking small breaths, telling myself that tonight might be different. When they arrived, I saw immediately that the night was not going to be what I hoped. His friends looked at me the way people look at a waiter who hasn't brought their food fast enough, barely acknowledging my existence, offering tight, polite smiles. They talked loudly, laughed loudly, and ordered loudly, as if volume could somehow prove how important they were. But I stayed calm. I always stayed calm around Ethan and his world. I had learned to shrink myself just enough to avoid conflict, but not enough to disappear. Halfway through the dinner, after drinks stilled their filters and loosened their mouths, one of Ethan's friends asked me casually, "So, Andrea, what do you do now?" I felt a warm pride in my chest as I told them about my small business, how I made furniture, how I worked from a garage, how I hoped to expand soon. I spoke with a quiet excitement, the kind that comes from loving something deeply. But before I could even finish, Ethan leaned back in his chair, smirking. That smirk still burns in my memory like a match pressed against skin. He said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Her little garage business will never grow. It's just a girl's hobby. She needs to stop wasting time and get a real job." The table erupted in laughter, not the kind of laughter people hide behind hands or disguise as coughs. No, this was open, cruel, humiliating laughter, the kind that wraps around your throat and squeezes until you can't breathe. I felt my heart drop, but I didn't show it. I looked at him calmly, even though inside, I felt like someone had shoved me into freezing water. I forced a smile not because I was okay, but because crying or arguing would give him exactly what he wanted, proof that I was small and weak. So I did the only thing I knew would protect my dignity. I stood up quietly, placed my napkin on the table, and said, "I'm heading out. Enjoy your dinner." Ethan didn't stop me. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look embarrassed. He just laughed again and said, "See, sensitive." Like I said, I walked out of that restaurant with a calm face and a heart that felt like it had been hit with a hammer. The night air outside was cold, and as I walked to my car, the humiliation replayed in my mind again and again. His words echoed as if the air itself wanted to hurt me. Just a girl's hobby, never going to grow. Get a real job. I sat in my car for several minutes, hands on the steering wheel, trying to decide whether to cry or drive home. In the end, I did neither. I just sat there, staring at the streetlights, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and fire. And then my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach twist. It was Daniel Ethan's best friend, the same Daniel who had been at the dinner, the one who laughed with the others, the one who, I assumed, shared Ethan's opinion. I almost didn't answer, but something in me was curious. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the need to understand why people enjoyed tearing others down. When I picked up, Daniel didn't waste time. His voice was quiet, calmer than I expected. "Andrea, are you all right?" I didn't respond immediately. I was trying to understand if this was pity or another layer of mockery. But then he continued, his words slow, almost hesitant. "Listen, what Ethan said back there was wrong, completely wrong. And I need to tell you something he would never want you to know." I felt my whole body grow still. The air inside the car felt heavier. Then he said the words that took my breath away. "Andrea, he's threatened by you, more than you realize." For a moment, I forgot how to speak. It didn't make sense. Threatened by me? By my tiny garage business? But Daniel's voice didn't waver. "And there's something else. Something I think you should hear. Something about why he keeps putting you down." The cold night outside suddenly felt much colder. My heartbeat grew louder, and I quietly whispered, "Tell me," because I could feel it. That call was going to change everything. When I told Daniel to tell me, I didn't expect the long silence that followed. For a few seconds, all I could hear on the phone was the faint background noise of cars passing wherever he was. It was almost as if he was struggling to decide whether he should continue or keep quiet and pretend the moment never happened. I waited calmly, even though my chest felt tight, like someone was pressing a cold hand right between my ribs. Finally, he spoke. "Andrea, he's been talking about your business for months, not in a good way." His voice was low, steady, as if he didn't want anyone around him to overhear. "He keeps bringing it up with the guys, especially when you're not around. He makes jokes, says you're wasting your time, that you'll quit soon." My grip on the phone tightened. I wasn't surprised that Ethan mocked me, but hearing that he had turned it into a routine, almost a performance for his friends, felt different. It felt cruel in a way I hadn't prepared for, but I still stayed quiet. I wanted to know more, but that's not the real reason. Daniel continued, almost whispering. "The truth is, your dedication, your passion makes him uncomfortable." I frowned, confused. "And comfortable." "Daniel, he has a stable job, a good salary, everything he wants. Why would my small business bother him?" Daniel exhaled. "Because he knows he doesn't love what he does. He's good at it, sure, but he doesn't love it. He sees you chasing something you truly care about, something you're building with your own hands, and it eats at him. He feels stuck." "Andrea, you remind him of everything he never had the courage to try." For a moment, the world outside my car seemed to blur. The headlights passing in front of me turned into streaks of white light. I wasn't expecting this explanation. In my mind, Ethan was always the confident one, the one who moved through life like he owned the air others breathed. The idea that he could feel threatened by me, frightened by my passion, felt strange, almost unbelievable. But the quiet sincerity in Daniel's voice made it clear he wasn't exaggerating to comfort me. He was telling the truth. Look, Daniel added after a moment, I'm not saying this to defend him. I'm telling you because, well, I don't want you to shrink because of him. I saw your work. I follow your page. What you do is real, Andrea. It's not a hobby. It's not some childish dream. And you're good at it. Damn good. I felt a sudden heat in my eyes, the kind that usually comes before tears. But I refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. I took a slow breath, steadying my voice. Daniel, why are you telling me this? There was another pause, longer this time, like he was choosing each word carefully. Because I saw your face when he said that, and I shouldn't have left. I'm sorry for that. I just got carried away with the group. But when you walked out, something didn't feel right. I didn't want to leave things like that. His apology was unexpected, but it didn't erase what had happened. Still, something in me softened slightly. Not for Ethan, but for Daniel's honesty. I appreciate you telling me, I said quietly. I really do. Before ending the call, Daniel hesitated again. Andrea, don't let him stop you. If anything, use it. You have something special. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. When I hung up, I didn't drive home right away. I sat there in the dark parking lot, listening to the hum of the city, trying to make sense of everything. Daniel's words replayed in my mind, especially the part about Ethan feeling threatened. I had never considered that possibility. My brother had always seemed so sure of himself, so confident in his choices. But maybe that confidence was just a mask he wore so well that even I, his sister, believed it. As I finally started the engine and drove home, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was more like a quiet awakening, a realization that I had been shrinking myself to avoid conflict, to avoid being seen as the sensitive one, to avoid giving Ethan more reasons to mock me. But maybe, just maybe, the real problem wasn't me being too sensitive. Maybe it was me being too silent. The next morning, I woke up to a headache, probably from the emotional exhaustion of the night before. My garage workspace was cold, the concrete floor still holding the chill of dawn. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat down at my workbench. My tools were laid out exactly how I left them, my half-finished wooden coffee table resting in the corner, waiting for me to give it shape. For a moment, I just stared at the wood, running my fingers over its rough edges. The quiet of the garage felt comforting, like it understood me better than most people did. Here, in this small space that smelled of sawdust and determination, I wasn't just a girl with a hobby. I was someone building something real, something meaningful. I opened my notebook, the one where I wrote down every idea, every design, every dream, and flipped through the pages. Some were filled with detailed sketches. Others had rough, messy lines drawn during moments of sudden inspiration. I had ideas for entire collections, collaborations, workshops, maybe even my own studio one day. But I had pushed all of that aside because I was scared of looking foolish in front of people like Ethan. That morning, something inside me hardened, not in a bitter way, but in a focused way. I decided I wasn't going to dim myself anymore to fit into Ethan's version of success. If my dreams made him uncomfortable, that was his burden, not mine. Still, revenge wasn't my first thought, at least not the kind of revenge people imagine: loud, explosive, dramatic. No, the kind of revenge I wanted was quiet, patient, and steady. The kind that didn't require shouting or confrontation. The kind where I simply became so good at what I did that even the people who doubted me had no choice but to fall silent. I spent the rest of the day working with a new energy I hadn't felt in months, maybe even years. I sanded, polished, carved, and shaped wood until my arms ached. I took photos of my pieces, edited them carefully, posted them online with thoughtful captions, and even reached out to a couple of local small businesses about possible collaboration. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, things began to change. My posts started gaining attention, first a few likes, then a few shares, then messages from people asking about custom orders. One influencer reached out for a partnership. A local cafe asked to display my pieces. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was moving. But the real turning point came one afternoon when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. At first, I almost ignored it, but when I opened it, I froze. It was a voice note from Daniel. I hesitated before pressing play, unsure if I wanted to revisit the memory of that dinner, but curiosity won. His voice came through, warm and calm. "Hey, Andrea, I hope it's okay that I'm reaching out. I've been seeing your posts lately and, wow, your work looks incredible. Seriously, I wasn't exaggerating when I said you had talent. I'm proud of you and I think it's time someone said it." I listened to the message twice. The first time, I felt surprised. The second time, I felt something else, motivation. Later that evening, as I sat on the floor of my garage surrounded by wood shavings and the comforting smell of varnish, I realized something important. My revenge didn't have to be loud. It didn't have to be dramatic. It didn't have to involve yelling at Ethan or proving him wrong directly. My revenge would be simple, quiet, persistent, and undeniable. All I had to do was keep going, keep building, keep growing, because one day, Ethan wouldn't laugh. One day, he would look at what I built and feel the weight of his own words. And that day would be the beginning of everything. The weeks that followed Daniel's voice note felt strangely different, not because anything dramatic happened overnight, but because something inside me had quietly shifted. My days were still the same. I still worked long hours in my garage, still got sawdust in my hair, still forgot to eat lunch sometimes because I got lost in shaping a piece of wood. But emotionally, I felt steadier, more grounded, like the fog around me had finally started to clear. My business, which had once been something I described shyly, became something I started to stand behind with confidence. I wasn't embarrassed anymore when people asked what I did for a living. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to justify myself or shrink my excitement to make others comfortable. And as my confidence grew, the world around me seemed to respond slowly, then more steadily. Orders became consistent, then frequent, then overwhelming in a good way. I had to stop taking custom requests at one point because I physically couldn't keep up. And when I posted about that online, people responded with kindness and support instead of judgment. They told me to take my time, to prioritize quality over speed, to work at my own pace. The more my small community grew, the more I felt my own belief in myself strengthening. But with success came something I hadn't fully prepared for: the attention of people who never took me seriously before. One afternoon, about 2 months after that terrible dinner, my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. She rarely called me during the day, so I wiped the dust off my hands and answered immediately. "Andrea, your brother said you've been busy," she asked cautiously. There was a tone in her voice I recognized instantly, a mix of curiosity and mild worry, as if my busy might be something irresponsible. "Yes, Mom," I replied gently. "The business is growing. I've been working a lot. I actually stopped taking custom orders for now." There was a pause. "Stop taking orders? Why?" "Because I have too many," I said simply, trying not to sound defensive. Another pause. Longer this time. I pictured her blinking, processing my words slowly. "Oh, well, that's good then," she said, and I could hear the uncertainty behind her attempt at support. Whenever my mother didn't fully understand something, she filled the silence with soft sighs and vague agreement. But this time, I didn't feel hurt by it. I knew she didn't mean any harm. She came from a generation where creativity wasn't considered a career unless you were already famous. To her, hard work was supposed to look like a uniform, a commute, a tiring office, and a boss who approved or disapproved of your performance. The idea of building something with your own hands and selling it independently didn't make sense to her world. Still, the call made me wonder something. Had Ethan told her about my progress? Or had she seen my posts online? I dismissed the thought and went back to work. But as days passed, more people in our extended family suddenly remembered I existed. Aunts I hadn't heard from in months left comments on my photos. Cousins I barely talked to messaged me saying things like, "Wow, you're doing so well, mashallah," and send me prices. I might order something soon. It was sweet, in a way, but I couldn't help feeling a tiny ache in my chest every time someone acted surprised at my progress. Their surprise wasn't the problem, it was the fact that they had assumed I would fail. Still, I kept my focus on my craft, because somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this was just the beginning, and even though people around me were starting to treat me differently, Ethan's silence was the loudest thing of all. He hadn't made a single comment about my work. No calls, no messages, no sarcastic remarks filtered through the family grapevine. It was as if he had erased that dinner from his memory and assumed I would erase it from mine, too. But I hadn't, and I wouldn't. Not because I wanted revenge at that moment, but because I needed to remember how it felt to be laughed at. Humiliation can sometimes be the strongest kind of fuel if you burn it slowly. One Friday evening, after a long day of sanding and varnishing, I got another message from Daniel. This one was a simple text. "Are you free for a quick call?" I stared at the screen for a moment. A month ago, I would have hesitated, unsure of his intentions. But we had exchanged a few messages since the voice note, nothing flirty or strange, just friendly, respectful conversations about creativity, work, and life. He had a way of speaking that made things feel lighter without being fake. So I replied, "Sure, give me 2 minutes." When he called, his voice was warm, almost cheerful. "So, Miss Famous Woodworker, how's life treating you?" I rolled my eyes, smiling despite myself, barely keeping up. "I think my arms have become permanent noodles." He laughed, a soft, calm laugh that didn't feel mocking. "Well, noodle arms or not, your work is blowing up. I've been showing your page to people at my office. They're obsessed." "You don't have to do that," I said softly, though the thought made my stomach flutter with a strange warmth. "I know," he replied. "I want to." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. It wasn't awkward, just thoughtful. Then Daniel cleared his throat. "Actually, I wanted to tell you something. Do you remember that cafe you posted about last week? The one that's using your shelves and wall pieces?" "Of course," I said. "They were amazing to work with." "Well, Ethan saw it." I felt my breath catch. "What?" "Yeah, he came across it on Instagram. I don't think he knew it was your work at first. The cafe tagged you, though, and I was right there when he clicked through your profile." I suddenly felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine. My heart thumped loud enough that I was sure Daniel could hear through the phone. "What did he say?" I whispered. "That's the thing," Daniel replied slowly. "He didn't say anything, not a word. He just stared at your page for a long time, longer than normal. You know when someone is trying really hard to understand something, but doesn't want to admit it. It was like that." I swallowed. And then he closed the app and changed the topic. I leaned back against the wall of my garage, letting his words sink in. Ethan had seen my progress, and instead of making a comment, good or bad, he stayed silent. A silence that felt less like ignorance and more like discomfort. But the real surprise came next. "Andrea," Daniel said, his tone turning serious, "I don't think he expected you to actually succeed. And now, he doesn't know how to deal with it." I closed my eyes for a moment. It hurt, more than I wanted to admit, not because I needed Ethan's approval, but because a part of me had always hoped he would at least acknowledge my effort. Even a simple good job would have meant something, even if it came too late. But silence was worse. Silence was absence. Before I could respond, Daniel continued, "I'm telling you this because I want you to be prepared. He's proud in a very complicated way. He doesn't like being wrong. And right now, he knows he's wrong about you. That sentence lingered in the air between us like smoke. We talked for another 10 minutes about regular things, gentle things, things that didn't feel heavy. And when we hung up, I found myself thinking about Daniel more than I expected. He had become a quiet presence in my life. Someone who didn't demand anything, didn't judge, didn't push. He just understood. But I wasn't naive. I knew his loyalty to Ethan was strong. They had been best friends since childhood. So the fact that Daniel felt compelled to check on me, to encourage me, to update me, meant more than he probably realized. The following days went by in a blur of work. I was preparing for my first small exhibit at a community art fair. It wasn't anything grand, but to me, it felt like another brick in the foundation I was building. I poured everything into that preparation. Every piece I crafted felt like a message, a reminder that I was moving forward even when others expected me to stop. The night before the fair, I stayed up until almost 3 a.m. arranging pieces, polishing every surface, checking for tiny imperfections only I would notice. When I finally collapsed into bed, my body was aching, but my heart felt light. The next morning, something happened that I never saw coming. As I unloaded my pieces from the car at the fair, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around, expecting maybe a stranger or a volunteer. But it wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a volunteer. It was Ethan, standing there quietly, hands in his pockets, eyes on my work, expression unreadable. And in that moment, I realized this was the beginning of the shift. The moment where the past and future finally collided. The moment where everything I had built started to speak for itself. I took a slow breath. He took one too, and neither of us said a single word. Not yet. For a few seconds, Ethan and I simply stood there, two siblings who had once shared childhood secrets, who had once fought over the last slice of pizza, who had once played hide-and-seek in the backyard, now suddenly facing each other as adults, with an entire world of unspoken words hanging between us. He didn't look angry. He didn't look smug. He didn't even look apologetic. He looked unsure. It was a strange expression on him, like his face wasn't used to holding that kind of vulnerability. His eyes flicked from me to the pieces of furniture ranged carefully at my booth table. He lingered on each item, touching nothing, but observing everything. "Hey," he finally said, voice quieter than I expected. I swallowed. "Hi," a simple word, but my voice felt thick, like I had to push it through a wall of memories of the dinner, memories of his laughter, memories of how small I felt that night. He nodded once, then looked again at the display. A wooden lamp with a curved base, a coffee table with smooth, rounded edges, a shelf shaped like a leaf, pieces I had spent hours perfecting. "These are yours?" he asked, even though the sign in front of us clearly said Andrea's workshop. "Yes," I said calmly. He let out a slow breath, almost like he was trying to steady himself. "They look different from what I imagined." I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" He hesitated. "I don't know. More real, I guess." I didn't think. His voice faded before he finished the sentence, but I already knew what he meant. He didn't think I could do it. He didn't think my business would grow. He didn't think I was capable. For a moment, I surprised myself. I felt no anger, not even frustration, just a quiet acceptance of something I had already known deep inside. When he didn't continue, I simply walked past him and began arranging some price tags on the table. I didn't want to drag out this moment or force anything out of him. He was here. That alone was already more than I expected. After a few seconds of silence, he spoke again. "Mom told me you've been busy, really busy." "I have," I replied without looking at him. "And you stopped taking orders?" "Yes." Another pause. "That's good." The way he said it wasn't enthusiastic or supportive. It was more like he was trying to fit the words into his mouth, like they were foreign to him. But something was different. His tone wasn't mocking. It wasn't dismissive. It was genuine, even if hesitant. "Mom showed me your Instagram," he said next. "Oh." I kept my voice neutral. "Yeah, she's been checking it more than she checks mine." he added with a small, humorless laugh. I didn't respond. I was scared that if I opened the door to conversation too wide, he might step in with something hurtful again, and I wasn't ready for that. My heart was strong now, but still healing. Then he surprised me. I shouldn't have said what I said that night. My hand rose above the table. I slowly turned to look at him. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't even looking at my work anymore. He was staring at the ground, shoulders tense, jaw tight like the words he just said had been pulled out of him by force. I was stupid, he muttered, and drunk, and showing off because my friends were there. It was a stupid moment. I didn't speak. Not yet. He kept going, talking faster now. I know you probably don't care or don't want to hear it, but I realized later that I crossed a line. You didn't deserve that. Something in me softened only slightly, but I didn't let it show on my face. I folded my arms gently, not defensively, but firmly. Ethan, I said calmly, you didn't just cross the line. You made me feel small in front of people who already didn't take me seriously. He flinched, actually flinched. It was the first time I had seen guilt take over him so visibly. I know, he whispered, and I'm sorry. The apology wasn't rushed. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't forced. It sat between us like a fragile object, delicate and real. For the first time since the dinner, I felt my heartbeat slowly return to normal. I took a breath and let it out. Okay, I said simply. Not it's fine. Because it wasn't. Not I forgive you, because forgiveness takes time. Just okay, a starting point. A door opened slightly. He nodded, accepting that single word without pushing for more. Then he cleared his throat and looked again at my display. You're really doing well, he said softly. Thank you, and these pieces. You made all of them. I did, with my hands. In the garage you laughed about. He winced again. Yeah, I deserved that. But I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was just stating a fact. Before I could say anything else, a customer approached my booth, an older woman with kind eyes who had been hovering nearby. She smiled warmly at me. Hi, dear. I've been waiting to see your work in person. I felt my chest warm with a gentle pride. Welcome. Please look around. As I began explaining the details of a piece to her, I could feel Ethan standing behind me, listening quietly, not interrupting, not judging, just listening. After the woman purchased a small decorative wall piece, I wrapped it carefully in brown paper, tied it with a string, and handed it to her. Thank you so much, she said. Your work has soul. You can tell you love what you do. My throat tightened. Compliments had always felt nice, but coming today right now while Ethan stood watching, it felt like a small piece of healing settling inside me. When she left, Ethan spoke again. You know, I never thought people would line up to buy handmade furniture, but now, seeing it, he shook his head. It's impressive. I gave him a small nod. This is where my heart is. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him since we were kids. Something soft. Something unguarded. I'm glad you didn't listen to me, he whispered. Me too. He stayed for a few more minutes, walking around my booth, touching nothing but absorbing everything. It felt like he was finally seeing me, not the sister he thought he needed to advise, not the girl he misunderstood, but the woman I actually was. Before leaving, he said, if you ever need help carrying things or setting up, if you want, I can help. That surprised me. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I simply said, I'll remember that. He nodded awkwardly, then walked away. His footsteps were slow, almost hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he should leave or say something more. But he didn't come back. When he disappeared into the crowd, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. But the day wasn't done surprising me yet. As the fair continued, more customers came by, complimenting, buying, asking questions. I felt so in my element that the hours passed quickly. When the fair finally wound down, and I began packing up, the sun was low in the sky, casting orange, and gold reflections off every wooden piece I carried back to my car. I was closing the trunk when I heard footsteps and turned around. It was Daniel. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee and a bag of snacks. "Thought you might be hungry," he said with a smile. I exhaled, relieved. "You have no idea." He handed me a cup, still warm, a flavor he knew I liked because at some point in our conversations, I had mentioned it. Small details like that always meant more than grand gestures. "So," he said casually, "I saw Ethan here earlier." I opened the coffee lid and took a slow sip before answering. "Yeah, he came. We talked." Daniel's eyebrows rose a little. "Talked like civil humans." I laughed softly. "Shockingly, yes." Daniel nodded, looking thoughtful. "Good. Maybe he needed that." "Maybe," I agreed. He leaned against the car next to mine, his shoulder almost brushing mine, but not quite. "How do you feel?" I considered his question carefully. "Lighter," I said. "Not healed completely, but lighter." Daniel's smile was soft. "You should. You've worked hard, Andrea. You've earned every bit of success." We talked for a while about the fair, about my growing business, about his work, about simple things like how tired my arms were and how badly he wanted to sit down. It was easy, calm, peaceful. At one point, Daniel looked at the booth area behind us and said, "You know, this is just the beginning for you." His voice wasn't dramatic. It wasn't filled with hype. It was steady, certain, grounded. And somehow, I believed him. After we finished packing, he insisted on helping me carry the heavier pieces, even though I told him he didn't have to. As he loaded the last table into the car, I found myself thinking about how different he was from Ethan, not in a competitive way, but in a gentle, necessary way. Where Ethan was complicated, guarded, quick to react, Daniel was patient, thoughtful, and observant. Where Ethan hid insecurity behind arrogance, Daniel expressed understanding without ego. And where Ethan's silence had once felt heavy, Daniel's presence felt light. When everything was done, he closed the trunk gently and turned to me. "Hey, Andrea, yeah? If you ever need someone to talk to, or someone to help, or someone to just be here, I'm around." My heart tightened in a soft, warm way I hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you," I said, genuinely. He smiled slow, sincere, and then left, letting me drive home with a quiet mind and a strangely full heart. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything that had happened. Ethan showing up, his apology, his discomfort, his slow realization that I wasn't the sister he imagined, Daniel's quiet support, the customers, the compliments, the growth, and something became clear to me. True revenge isn't about hurting someone back. It's about rising so steadily and so undeniably that the other person is forced to face their own limitations. It's about becoming everything they said you couldn't be. And as I drifted off to sleep, with the faint smell of wood varnish still lingering on my skin, I knew my journey wasn't ending. It was just beginning, and soon, the world, including Ethan, would see just how far I could go. When I look back at that stretch of my life, the months that came after Julian's visit to my warehouse office formed a strange emotional fog, a mixture of relief, confusion, quiet pride, and a kind of simmering resolve I had never fully felt before. It was as if something inside me had shifted permanently that night after he left. I didn't have tears. I didn't have anger. I didn't even have excitement. I had something much steadier, a sense of direction, a sense that everything he had said, everything he had asked, and everything he had finally understood had only pushed me further along a path I was already walking. And strangely, I was grateful for that. But life, as usual, didn't pause just because a major emotional moment had happened. I still had orders to fulfill, contractors to negotiate with, and a growing team that needed leadership. So I woke up the next morning earlier than usual, made myself a strong cup of coffee, tied my hair in a low ponytail, and drove to the warehouse while the streetlights were still buzzing. The city looked different at dawn. Softer, calmer, like an apology after a long night. I unlocked the warehouse door and stepped into the familiar cool air. that always greeted me. The machines were quiet, neatly parked under their covers, and the faint smell of dried paint and cardboard hung in the space. I touched one of the work tables lightly with my hand, maybe because I needed grounding, maybe because part of me still couldn't believe how far I had come. But that morning, I also noticed something else. A message from Daniel pinned to my office desk, written in his usually neat handwriting. Hope the conversation last night didn't shake you. Proud of you. Coffee later. It made me smile. He didn't push. He didn't press for details. He just existed like a calm, steady force in the background of my life. And sometimes that was enough to keep me centered. Later that afternoon, after the usual bustle died down, I sat with the small team of women I had hired from the neighborhood, college students, young mothers, a couple of retired ladies who enjoyed the extra income and conversation. They were sorting through new packaging samples and arguing in the friendliest way about which design felt classiest. I love moments like this, the warm, natural chaos of people who cared about their work. One of them, Myler, suddenly asked, Andrea, will we really have a second warehouse soon? I hesitated for a moment because I hadn't made any official announcements yet, but I felt my mouth curve into a smile before I even answered. Yes, I said, we will. And much sooner than I expected, they all clapped, some joking, some serious, but I could see the pride in their faces. They believed in this place. They believed in me, and that meant more than any apology Julie could ever give. Still, I knew my brother wasn't done processing. A week after our confrontation, he texted me again. Can we talk? Not about money, just talk. I stared at the message for a long moment. Part of me didn't want to open this door again, but another part of me, the part that had always longed for a real sibling relationship, said yes before I could overthink it. We met at a quiet cafe near the river. Julian arrived in a crisp shirt, hair carefully styled, but he had this uneasy, almost timid expression that I wasn't used to seeing on him. He sat across from me and exhaled deeply. I've been thinking a lot, he began, eyes avoiding mine, about what I said, about how I acted, and about what you showed me. He paused, cleared his throat. I was wrong, and I didn't realize how much that night at the dinner hurt you. I took a slow sip of tea, waiting. I wasn't going to rescue him from the discomfort of saying what he needed to say. He continued, I said those things because I thought, if you failed, you'd come back to the family business. I thought you were wasting your time. I thought I was helping in my own way. He shook his head, but I wasn't helping. I was belittling you, and I didn't see it until it was too late. For a moment, the only sound between us was the soft clinking of cups around the cafe. I finally spoke. You didn't hurt me because you doubted my business. You hurt me because you doubted me, and you did it publicly. You made everyone laugh at me. His shoulders dropped. I know, and I hate that I became the kind of person who would do that. Silence again. But this time, it didn't feel heavy, just honest. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. I've been writing down ways I can help you. If you want help, not control, just support, or ideas, or even connections, if you ever need them. I felt something strange rise in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but something adjacent to it. I hadn't expected him to go this far. I hadn't expected him to try this hard, and it softened something inside me that I didn't even realize had still been tense. Julian, I said gently, I don't need anything from you. Not right now, maybe not ever, but I appreciate this. I really do. He nodded slowly. I understand. We talked for another hour about our childhood, about our parents, about how he always felt pressured to be the successful brother and how I felt invisible growing up. It wasn't magical. It wasn't emotional or dramatic. It was just real. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to my brother, not a rival. But real healing doesn't come from one conversation. It comes from consistency. And I wanted to see consistency. Over the next few weeks, Julian actually tried. He didn't show up unannounced. He didn't give unsolicited advice. He didn't brag or belittle or compare. He sent supportive texts like saw your new collection photos. They look great. Or proud of you for taking risks. Small things, quiet things, but they mattered. Meanwhile, my business entered the busiest phase of the year. Holiday orders. On some days, the warehouse looked like a cheerful mess of ribbons, labels, and shipping boxes stacked higher than my head. I spent long nights organizing, designing, balancing spreadsheets, and occasionally dancing with Mila when the stress hit us too hard. We were tired, but in a good way, the kind of tired that comes from success, not struggle. Then came the moment that would change everything. A major national lifestyle influencer posted an unboxing of our gift sets. She wasn't paid. She wasn't sponsored. She had simply bought from us and loved it. Within hours, our online store exploded. Orders came in by the minute, thousands. The website crashed twice. I had to call emergency IT support. My team stayed until 2 a.m. that night, laughing and packing and eating pizza with paint-stained hands. And somewhere in that chaos, I realized this is what I built. This is what my brother once mocked. This is what he said would never grow beyond a garage. But here it was, an empire in the making. A few days later, Julian visited again. This time, he walked through the warehouse with quiet amazement, watching the team pack hundreds of boxes. He didn't try to be loud or authoritative. He just stood there, absorbing everything. Finally, he whispered, "I never imagined this. Not even close." I smiled gently. "That's okay." I did. He looked at me like he was seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time. And in that moment, something inside me settled. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. He envied what I had built, yes. But it wasn't the petty kind of envy. It was the kind that comes with respect, maybe even inspiration, and that felt like the calmest revenge of all. If someone had told me years earlier that the biggest turning point in my life would come from a moment of public humiliation, I would have laughed. Yet, as I stood in the center of that bustling warehouse one cold December afternoon, surrounded by workers taping boxes and printers whirring nonstop, I realized something. Sometimes pain becomes a doorway. Sometimes disrespect becomes a direction. And sometimes the people who try to break you end up shaping you without meaning to. Julian never intended to guide me toward success, but in his arrogance, he had pushed me so far that I had no choice but to climb. That week felt like living inside a storm of orders, emails, and late-night production runs. I barely slept, but somehow my body moved through each day with a quiet determination I had never felt before. By the 4th day of the viral surge, I brought in 20 temporary workers, rented additional storage space, and arranged for trucks to come twice a day instead of once. But in the middle of all that chaos, real chaos, the good kind, I kept thinking about how differently things had been just a year earlier. Back then, I was working alone in my garage, trying to convince suppliers to take me seriously. Back then, I was using second-hand tools, praying orders wouldn't exceed my capacity. Back then, Julian's words would have crushed me, but now they only fueled me. One night, around 11 p.m., after everyone had gone home, I sat in my office chair, legs crossed, staring at a box on a table. It was our new premium set, white matte exterior, soft gold lettering, and inside, a neatly arranged collection of handcrafted items wrapped in delicate paper. I held it in my hands and whispered to myself, "This is mine. Every part of this is mine." It wasn't about pride. It was about ownership, not only of my business, but of my life. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A message from Julian. "Just saw your brand on a top small businesses to support list." Wow, I smiled softly. He had gotten into this habit of sending little messages whenever he saw something related to my work. It wasn't intrusive or performative. It was simply warming, a small thread of connection being woven back into place, almost cautiously, but undeniably. The next morning, I met him for breakfast, not because he asked, but because I wanted to. We sat at a bakery near my warehouse, a quiet place with wooden tables and the smell of fresh bread drifting through the air. Julian arrived early, which surprised me. He used to be perpetually late to everything. He ordered coffee, glanced at me, and said, "Andrea, can I ask you something a bit personal?" I nodded, cutting into my omelet. "What do you actually want now? With all this growth, with the success, what's the big picture?" It was a simple question, but for some reason, it settled heavily in the space between us. I leaned back, thinking it through. "I want independence," I said softly, "not just financial, emotional. I want to know that my life isn't tied to anyone's approval. I want to build something that's mine and be proud of it, whether other people understand or not." Julian looked down at his cup, quiet for a long moment. "I never had that," he said finally. "Dad expected me to take over his contacts, his business circles, his expectations. Every success I had felt like his success, not mine. I pushed you because if you succeeded, it made me question why I wasn't doing something meaningful on my own." I blinked slowly, letting that sink in. It wasn't an excuse. It was an explanation, and that made it easier to hear. "But Andrea," he continued, "watching you build all this, it made me want more for myself, real more, not the fake achievements I used to brag about." I held my breath for a moment before speaking. "Then start," I said gently. "Start something of your own." He laughed softly. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't simple," I replied, smiling faintly. "But it's possible, and you're allowed to change. You're allowed to do something different." He stared at me thoughtfully, as if seeing a version of me he had never understood. Not the younger sister he mocked, not the girl he dismissed, but an adult with her own strength. "I'll think about it," he said eventually, and he did. Over the next few months, as I expanded my operations, hired a logistics manager, and signed a lease for a second warehouse across town, Julian began exploring his own ideas. He asked me questions sometimes, but never the condescending type. He asked about branding, about supplier relationships, about how I managed seasonal demand spikes, and each time I answered calmly, generously, not because he had earned it, but because I had grown past the desire to punish him. My revenge, if it could even be called that, wasn't about hurting him. It was about rising so high that his words became meaningless. And they had, completely. One evening, just before New Year's, Julian came to my office. He knocked lightly, stepped inside, and held a sleek folder in his hand. "I want you to see something," he said. Inside the folder were sketches, notes, market research, and a rough business plan. He had been working on an eco-friendly coffee line, sourcing beans directly from small farmers, focusing on transparent operations, and designing minimalist biodegradable packaging. For the first time in his life, Julian looked unsure rather than arrogant. "Do you think this is stupid?" he asked quietly, and in that moment, everything came full circle. That question, those exact words, were the same ones I had wanted to ask him years ago when I first started my garage project. But I never did, because I knew he would mock me. Yet here he was, asking me with genuine vulnerability. I didn't rush my answer. I studied the papers carefully, flipping through each page. When I looked up, I spoke with the calm confidence I had earned through years of work. "No," I said, "it's not stupid. It's thoughtful. It's promising. It's you." Relief washed over his face. "You can do this," I added. "You just have to commit the way you never committed to anything before." He nodded slowly, taking in my words as if they carried weight. Real weight, not the imagined authority he used to project. From that day onward, our relationship began to shift in ways I hadn't expected. We didn't suddenly become the closest siblings in the world, but we grew into something steadier: mutual respect, mutual understanding. We became two adults learning how to treat each other kindly after years of pretending that rivalry was normal. And the world around us kept moving. My second warehouse launched successfully, doubling our production capacity. I hired a social media team, partnered with small artisans for limited edition lines, and even started mentoring to young women who wanted to start their own businesses someday. It felt like everything I once dreamed of had multiplied into something far bigger than me. One day, during a supplier meeting, my phone buzzed with a video message from Julian. I opened it quietly. He was standing in front of a small storefront, freshly painted, with a temporary sign reading, "Coming soon. Midnight beans." He grinned at the camera and said, "But you'd want to see this. First location, lease signed today." I hadn't expected the wave of emotion that washed over me, not because he was opening a business, but because he had finally found something he could call his own. That night, I sat alone in my office and let myself reflect on the long journey from the moment he mocked me at that luxury dinner till now. The humiliation, the silence, the tears I never showed, the determination that pulled me forward, the cold nights in the garage, the days when I doubted myself, but worked anyway, the orders I packed by hand, the breakthroughs, the viral moment, the growth, the rebuilding of trust, the softening of old wounds, and finally, the quiet realization that revenge is not always about payback. Sometimes it's about transformation. He envied my empire, yes, but now, instead of trying to tear it down, he was using that envy as fuel to build something of his own. And that was the most unexpected outcome of all. Weeks later, when he held the grand opening of his cafe, he invited me as the first guest. As I stood there, with the warm smell of roasted beans and soft music filling the space, Julian walked up to me and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is my sister, the one who taught me what real courage looks like." And for the first time in our adult lives, I felt no bitterness, no ache, no memory of humiliation, just peace. As I looked at him, smiling in genuine pride, I finally understood the calmest truth about revenge. The strongest revenge is becoming someone they can never dismiss again. And I had done that. I had become someone I myself once doubted I could be. And now, standing there beside my brother, I whispered inside my own heart, with gratitude and quiet triumph, I made it. If you enjoyed this calm revenge story and want more long, detailed style stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my calm revenge. Your support helps these stories reach more people who love calm but powerful storytelling.